flying around on corporate jets and drinking very expensive wine. And
This is probably beyond what you expected your life to turn out to be, I'm assuming.
I was a mess, particularly in the core of my soul. It wasn't about professionally. I was still looking fine on the outside.
Peaking now at a new level professionally because you mastered all these other dimensions that are core.
And you've got to make a decision. I am where I am today because of me. I can tell you that I'm happy. I have a happy marriage.
You bring Nicole out and she has no idea you're about to propose, and we have footage of this, and there's people like losing their mind.
It doesn't matter how much you failed.
Yeah, yeah.
You just have to be humble enough to get help. My encouragement to you would be get in on the inner circle.
If you're one of those people that are high on success and low on happiness, you may want to pay attention to this episode of Headspace. I consider myself a poster child of this. I've shared my story many times, and I love helping people in that place in life. One of my favorite stories of transformation is the story of Brandon Knicely, who is now one of my best friends, my business partner, and I just respect him, love him, admire him, and you will know why after you listen to his story. Welcome to Headspace. Enjoy this episode. Are you ready to talk about this stuff?
As ready as I'll ever be.
All right, guys. So I invited Brandon Nicely. He's one of my favorite people to speak about something really, really important. And sort of a classic trap for high performers is being super, super successful professionally and pretty low personally. And Brandon is one of my best friends, my business partner. We've done all of this sort of work together, both professionally and spiritually and emotionally and character-wise. So he and I are, I consider, poster childs of the classic high achiever trap. So let's start with this. You built $1 billion company. How do you get there? How do you climb to that level? How does that feel? The dimensionality of it. Just give us some color. How do you, if we are to imagine your journey, how would that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've never really thought about the arc as much, but I guess sometimes you have to. It's a little bit luck, and it's a lot of preparation, I guess, or I would say less preparation and more. It's more about being in, having knowledge and background and proximity to opportunity, right?
So the knowledge was the training, correct?
Well, I would say this. That's what I was going to say. I'm like a country boy from the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Grew up on both a farm and a ranch. But then when I went to college at West Virginia University, I met some interesting people and really changed my life in terms of my faith journey. And then I sort of circulated through that, went to IBM where I worked as a mechanical engineer. I joined IBM, and you're young. You don't really know what you're trying to do. You just look for tactical opportunity. And what IBM provided me, actually the first job was teaching optical communications back at divestiture, right when the Bell operating companies were first born, the R-Box. Mm-hmm. And I spent a year on the road, and that just killed me. So I realized I needed to get something else. And IBM recruited me, and so I figured at least if I got into IBM, I would have lots of breadth of places to go. And back in those days, most people worked for big corporations.
Right.
And so this is in the 80s. And so I spent time, but I had a desire. There was an opportunity in New York City, which most people from where I'm from would never go to New York City. So there had to be a little craziness, a little bit of edginess to take a journey.
Are you saying that they wouldn't want to go to New York City, or they wouldn't get an opportunity to go to New York City?
Well, really both. But I think most of the people from my hometown, I was the least likely to go to New York City.
Okay.
And it's just ironic that I ended up there and ended up in one of the high-end sort of IBM sales. Well, actually, it was in a telecommunications marketing group that covered the entire city, that 17 vertical industries. So it provided great proximity to lots of different kinds of business, vertical industries. But I ended up in Wall Street because my background was in large-scale networking and communication systems. And where better to be than Wall Street, where where networks were very valuable. If they went down, for seconds, you would lose millions of dollars in trades, et cetera. And so I came from a background in engineering thinking to think about how to architect high availability, scalable networks. I say that just to say years of doing that gave me the background that when I met somebody in New York that happened to be a real estate guy, a broker dealer that was trying to bring communications as the next utility in buildings, i.e., smart buildings, I just happen to have the background and experience to know how to architect, sort of a lot of the dimensionality that's necessary in a shared network in a building. So I say that, how do you get there? I wouldn't have gotten to that if I hadn't put myself in New York City and hadn't been at the edge of my ability. Frankly, I went there and, I had a woman that I loved that was at IBM, and she was like the systems engineering manager that dressed me up and and taught me how to use utensils properly, et cetera. So I had some really good finishing school training when I first went to New York City. But IBM was a great platform to learn sort of the best. We're kind of the sales organization at IBM was one of the best of the best in the world. And so that I spent a year training with them, which was effectively an MBA. But so I would say that the combination of drive and access, a little bit ability, and those things sort of provided the environment that when an opportunity came along, I knew what I was doing, and it sort of attracted me and pulled me in. And then the journey went crazy. So you go from two of you or a few people into like 650, and
so from two founders to 650 employees, correct?
There were a couple founders. There were actually a few guys at the gig originally.
Right.
There was a president, but there was different people of different levels of, I would say, experience and knowledge. But I brought the first professional sort of experience from a technology platform development standpoint, I would say.
And didn't you tell me the office was like somewhere central in Manhattan? What was the location?
Yeah, my partner started in the GM building, actually, our first office. So we were right there, which became the Trump building. And so we always had really good Fifth Avenue addresses because my partner was a real estate guy. And so we weren't roughing it from a real estate.
So this feels like a movie to me, right? Like you go from 2 people to 600 people. You are in prime, like at the center of the universe, essentially, New York City, Manhattan, prime real estate, and you are growing like crazy. Describe the lifestyle. Describe an average day or an average week, maybe.
Well, you have to realize I was architecting a lot of the technical systems, and you had to build the team. So part of it was a sort of feast or famine. You're trying to get by on the skin of your teeth until you go to Silicon Valley and raise a big Series A, and then you're flush with cash, and then the challenge shifts to finding the right people, the cheeks and seats, right, to get scale. And so I had a great team of technical people that were from all over the world. It was a lot of fun. But I would say that a life in the day of for me back then had to do with literally it was an 18-hour day where sometimes I slept on the network operations center floor, very, very, very Elon-esque, if you will, because I was committed and our team was really committed. We had some really great guys and a lot of great talent, so it wasn't just me. But that became a gig where my partner was pretty capable, and we had about every third building under contract in New York City, which was about 200 million square feet. And then from there, though, what was interesting, we kind of created some things that hadn't been created before. And that was sort of the genesis that enabled us to outperform the market in terms of the revenue per cost per square foot. And so that got us into a whole nother category. But growing that business was 4 years of craziness. I mean, just meeting after meeting after meeting all day, working hard, playing hard. I was single at the time. So I would say it's it was the best of times in many ways, but we're flying around on corporate jets and drinking very expensive wine. And then all the things that lead with success is really what became challenging, I think, to my character. When you give a country boy, a lot of money and a lot of access to services and resources in New York City, then it's going to test your North Compass, right?
Yeah. So how does that? So basically, you are obviously super gifted. You have opportunities. You have an education. You rise. You hit this wave, and you just ride it all the way to the top. $1 billion company, 600 employees. You are flying in private jets. It's wonderful, right? On some level, this is probably beyond what you expected your life to turn out to be. I'm assuming, right? Not many of us can imagine that kind of future easily.
Well, except for you. You had the rock star lifestyle about the same time frame in terms of.
I did,
so both of us in our 20s were highly accomplished,
Yeah.
and
And
fortunate, I would say, right? I mean,
exactly. And then there's this. Then both of us faced a very similar, in many ways, crash, like a crisis of some sort. There's a gap that happens. And I think for me, for example, it was I was literally playing sports arenas across. I had music fans around 15 countries, and I was depressed, just depressed, depressed, depressed. So on the outside, my life looked like anybody's dream. On the inside, I was just dying, right? And what happened to me is that it caught up to me that I was hyper focused. I mean, a lot of both talent, hard work, and opportunity in one dimension, and then I should have let the other dimensions go. I thought they would just happen on their own, whatever the rationale was. I wasn't thinking about it. Turns out they were important for my fulfillment, for flourishing, all of that. How was that for you?
well, I was really happy during those days when things were going good.
Yeah.
It was a top of the world kind of thing. I would say that some of the chinks in my armor came out specifically when we were dealing with, I would say, board level discussions. There was some conflict that I still sort of had. I think I hadn't matured emotionally enough to deal with conflict in a positive way that didn't feel like it was offensive. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so
I
I
had a very
was
similar
not.
thing. Yeah.
I was not very good at handling people with dissenting opinions or people that don't necessarily have the knowledge, that were manipulative or political players. I didn't have the patience for it. And so, again, I was a very simple guy. And it wasn't until the nuanced later lessons of life came that caused me to adapt. But I think that probably the stressors that were induced were the key elements. For example, we were getting ready to go public. I worked on the S1, every single word, legal law. It was all this wordsmithing with the lawyers. And I was probably the one that articulated, or at least understood the business best in terms of the technical architecture, et cetera, and sort of the business model. But it was one of those things that was painful. But we got stuck in the April logjam in early 2001, I guess it was, or 2000, I forget which one. I blocked it out. But we had, like, us and about another 140 companies were stuck in the IPO logjam. So we were burning about 12 million a month in cash. And if that all of a sudden, we were expecting the IPO to provide the liquidity, the cash flow that we needed. And when that stopped, the whole telecom market basically came to a halt. You had people like Nortel and Verizon, or Nortel and Lucent trading at $80 and 62.5 respectively. And the next year they were like $1, or a couple of years afterwards. And so that was just a major avalanche that none of us were ready for. So I think for me, that's when the wheels started coming off the bus. People when you have those kinds of stressors induced, everybody runs for the hills. People react and respond to stress in different ways. We had Silicon Valley VCs that were playing games. We had other folks that were playing games. Everybody was looking for looking at their little rock to be safe under. And so that thing came to a screeching halt. We ended up selling the business, but the it was painful. And that's when, for example, when my career path took a left turn or abrupt stop, that created the stress or what's next. And
Right.
so I would sit around. Unfortunately, when you're used to that first experience, you're programmed to say, okay, the next one has to be as good or bigger. And you spend a lot of time. I spent many months actually sitting around and at home on my computer looking at creating new gigs. And at the time I had made some money, so I had become an angel investor, and I was giving money away right and left on things that I knew quite well. But it was the macro market had turned down so quickly that none of those gigs basically survived the drought.
Can
And
I
so I
pause you
lost a
for
lot
there
of money.
for
Yeah.
a second? This is actually an interesting insight. It seems to me that when you rise very high, that's sort of one of the curses. Like there's a much more space to fall, right? So there's something in us that refuses to accept anything but the peak. Is that a thing?
Yeah, I think you measure the tide by its height,
Right.
that it's the highest that it's been. And I think your expectations broaden. If you'd have reversed 7 years, I wouldn't even be considering this as a stressor. You just adjust to different market opportunities. But once you've been to the game, you've been to the mountain, then you sort of have an expectation. And I think somehow some of us even become entitled, thinking that we don't want to do a gig that isn't at least as good as the one before. And I think that a lot of us struggled. Most telecom professionals struggled in those early 2000 years to find something to do. Some people went back and taught. I know one guy that went and created a donut shop.
Right.
And my hat's off to him, because I couldn't do it, but
Yeah. It's not
he
bad at all.
adapted. He adapted, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what happened next? So what are some of the other things that happened that sort of describes that curve of professional success and then personal
Yeah.
misery, I guess, for
Well,
lack of a
again,
better
this
word.
goes back to your sort of, I would say, emotional maturity and resilience. I was sort of trying to figure out what was next. And I would say even my head had gotten a little big, because I was used to being, kind of dealing with a big game. And so there was a humbling, I would say, that happened after that boom and bust cycle that I had a hard time, like, sort of adjusting to. So whenever you have emotional sort of pressure, then often we respond with, emotional release behaviors. And some of those can be very unhealthy. Some people, alcohol, whatever, tobacco, alcohol,
Yeah.
sex, whatever. I mean, all of those things are things that actually begin sort of making you feel better,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but
It's self-medicating.
absolutely can corrupt your life. And that's effectively what happened to me. I just, a few opportunities, I just didn't make good choices, and found myself in a place where, it affected my family. It affected, pretty much every part of who I was. And so I think that you're I would call it swirling. I was swirling for a couple of years, trying to figure out how to get out of this downward spiral that was called the market, and became life. So one thing led to the other. I think that's part of what we need to teach people and kids, is to how to be resilient when things aren't all going well, right? One thing one dimension of life that's really not doing well, we shouldn't have let it sort of create the downward swirl for the rest of our life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Do you think there are certain dimensions of life that are sort of more foundational than others? In this, that you were saying, one thing goes down, it doesn't mean the other thing doesn't go down.
Yeah. Well, the classic problem that I had experienced was overcommitment to professional success,
Okay.
to the, to the extent that it was imbalanced with my personal success, if you will. So there's things that we measure personal success, and people have different measures of that success. I had previously been a very spiritual person and had faith, and because a variety of reasons, that was sort of really an area that I didn't focus on for a number of years. And because of that, because I sort of lost my moral compass a little bit, it actually prevented me from performing well in the other areas. And then ultimately, it's like this balance of the 360 behind me. If you have if you were to measure your life in 360 degrees, the area of, if you're super overbalanced in one area, then you're by nature, usually there's no time or energy left for the other areas. And that's what happened to me, is I basically became overbalanced and over invested in trying to figure out what was next,
And
to
therefore
where
imbalanced. Yeah.
but imbalanced, but also become impatient. I maybe have emotional act out in certain ways, because you're angry, you're frustrated, all of those things that happen when, you are at a high level of career, and then all of a sudden there's uncertainty and doubt. I pretty quickly jumped over to private equity in New York, where there was a lot of things to do, but I still never felt the level of accomplishment that I had, I think, in the late 90s, because I was building something of value. Private equity guys tend to fund deals, and so there was a period of time where my personal life just blew up. Right, it was just I made some bad decisions, and that's part of where our relationships help put some of that back together and balance. And your sort of mentoring has helped me a lot. When I came to Austin, so I left New York City, came to Austin, Texas, where I felt like there was a little more balance at some level in terms of faith and life and family. And there was kind of a natural, I think, respect for family in Texas. That was a
Yeah.
little different than New York City. So I
Hmm.
really liked that.
Different pace too, right? Different pace, different culture.
Definitely a different pace, different stresses. And so I mean, when you fly into New York City and LaGuardia after being gone on a business trip, you just felt the energy as soon as you came into town, and you're back in the game again. And I loved that. I thrived on it as a 20 something. But the older you get, then you have to look at more of a sustainable. You want to build. You should wisen up a little bit and actually build a more sustainable approach to
Hmm.
life, right?
Don't you think, I guess I'm asking because I remember our first, coffee that we got together, right? When we got together, and my sense was that, man, this is really accomplished and smart guy. I can learn a lot from him, but man, you weren't happy, and it was just one of those things that I go, oh wow, let's
Mm-hmm.
do something about this. And I guess the question is this: is that, at least in my case, you become very good at something, very, very successful at something. And then you neglect certain areas of life that are really central to you as a human being. And they bring you down, they bring you down. You lose joy, you lose peace, you stress. And then that affects the very thing you sacrificed it all for, because you become less good, less objective, less calm, less joyful, less giving, less good with people, right? I mean, did you experience some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think that your why is very important.
Right.
There's the what. Like what I was doing was building something cool in the 90s, but my why had gotten out of whack. I had lost my sort of faith driven, the core of who I really
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be as a person, the purpose behind what I was doing, um, because of some disappointing things that happened early. But I think that when you lose that purpose, like the core center,
Mm-hmm.
then you lose your compass a little bit. And so I think to the extent that I lost that compass was really the core of my happiness. And my soul, what really made me happy was being purpose driven, helping people,
Mm-hmm.
leveraging technology and leveraging business and things like that. But I had lost my kind of core purpose. And that's what the hole that was in my life. I felt like I had overinvested in professional purposes, and I had lost the driving essence of my soul, if you will, that really kept me together, which was my faith in God. And because of my decisions that I'd made, it had hurt my family. It just hurt a lot of. There's a number of years of pain and suffering because of choices that I'd made, and combined that with market dynamics, and it was really I was miserable in the mid 2000s, and that's when I made a change and I came to New York. I came to Austin, and found my way to church through some old friends that I had known from New York City that were actually that were actually part of your group, and I think in downtown Austin. When I first showed up, though, I was in I was a mess, particularly in the core of my soul. It wasn't about professionally; I was still looking fine on the outside, but in my heart, I was desiring good, solid friendships again that had similar spiritual objectives. That I was missing the fellowship of the brothers, if you will, And I remember seeing one of the guys that was in the community about the same age, and he and I had a natural affinity for each other. Then you and I had coffee, and I think I was in tears. I was just a mess. And what was great about it, though, is that there were answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like, hey, I get uncomfortable when a guy's, in tears in front of me and I don't know what to do. You had a real clear, sort of next steps, which gave me a lot of hope in terms of just that, I had lost hope that I could, get my spiritual life back in order. Um, and so I think that since that was core to me,
Yeah.
became the anchor element that had to get right. And then what was interesting, though, is the relationship between that and all the other outside things. And ultimately, sustainability, true life sustainability, is a function of having, your core element right, but then having your character map into all the other sort of areas of life, so that so you not only have a kind of a true north from a compass standpoint, but that actually applies into those areas. You actually apply it into your
Mm-hmm.
relationships, dating, or your relationships, friendships wise, and professionally, et cetera. And so I became, I think, I, I came back to who I really was as a person, but it required a lot of mentoring, and there were things I just had blinders. We
Yeah,
get
yeah,
blind. We
yeah.
get blinders. We know what we know. We know what we don't know. But many times it's those not knowing what we don't know that actually is the little tweak, like an engine that has one cylinder, it's out of
Yeah,
whack. The
yeah.
whole thing kind of wobbles and runs
So,
terribly.
so give
But it
us give us
requires that
give us
that
like a quick
tweaking.
high level. What did you the third thing, right? You like this is what I didn't know. I didn't know. Like, can you think of anything specific?
Well, I think there were just blind spots in terms of, um, I think just emotional maturity and being able to, like, I was really good at being a middle linebacker. I could blow up a front line and blow up a running back in the backfield, but I lacked kind of emotional reserves, I would say. I was very, I think, I hate to use the word, but I think I had when you grow up as a child, a lot of our formation things that were formed in us are formed from early childhood. And I was raised in a place where mother died when I was young. I was very independent, spent a lot of time on my own. My father and I were very different. Had a lot of respect for him, but I was as opposite as could have been. And so I basically ended up, my character formation was a lot of my own thinking. And I think that independent, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality is going to harden, if you will, dimensions in your character that you just need other people to see, because you may even see them at times, or maybe you see the effects of those things, but
Right,
you don't know how to change them. And one of the things that I think your superpower is your ability to see that and then be able to enroll me in sort of seeing it or illustrating it, and then helping provide real practical tips on how to change that, or how to adapt. And I think that's really but when you make those small tweaks, it's just like an engine that's out of whack. It just hums like I mean, it's just amazing what's happened in my life in the last, I don't know, 5 or 7 years, right? And relationships and family and professional balance. And so in general, the core of my spiritual sort of desires, purposes, et cetera, are all are synchronized. And,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
That's
it's
what that's what
helped
I that's what I
tremendously.
see. I mean, what you're one of my favorite people in that sense, that you quite uniquely, because I'm around a lot of people, a lot of very gifted people, successful people. You're one of those rare people who have all of that, and have, you're in many ways more accomplished than I am, and yet you had sort of this humility and this grit to venture into places that are not familiar, and you're not, you're not as free and great in these areas, and you ventured very courageously into them. And that's why I sort of, the big reason why I wanted you to talk and unpack this is because I think you're a great success story in my book, right? Is how you re-embraced faith. And we need faith because we need perspective. If we don't think from perspective, about our lives, the meaning of our lives, the purpose of our lives, we really, we're not doing ourselves a favor. We think about me all the time, right? Like the self-focus without the perspective, it just doesn't work very well. So you incorporated faith. You started sort of thinking about romance and love in ways that were uncomfortable, and you just pursued it in remarkable ways. And I think you did amazingly in relationships, just friendships, and investing into deep friendships and community. And you serve people, every day, every week, and that I think transformed you in remarkable ways. And I think the reason I sort of mention these dimensions is that I see you having this peaking now at a new level professionally, because you mastered all these other dimensions that are core, and then you added them to your natural giftedness and training and experience, And the things that you're doing now, I feel like are the result of all this work that you've done, not only professionally. Does that make sense? Is that accurate? Did I miss something? What? Tell
Well,
me.
I appreciate that. I think I don't feel like I'm that talented, but I think the what I have as a level of grit is probably right.
Yep.
Tenacity. Some people used to call me a bulldog, and uh, and there's value in that. But I think the thing that's the nuanced part of it is, there's the scripture in Proverbs that says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding." That reality kind of drives me to a place where I have to learn from others, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you were great at it. I mean, there's been many people in my life that have tried to, I'll say, train me and
Mm-hmm.
help me and mentor me. And because of my programming, I would only handle it only if they were pretty good at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so you have this is your superpower. You have mastery to be able to help people see what they don't see. And I think that's part of the value proposition of what you're doing in this program, and I'm a huge fan. So I think that trust, for example, is the basis of good relationships. If I didn't
Yeah.
feel like you had my best, sort of
Mm-hmm.
intentions at heart, then I would have a harder time trusting what you're saying or doing what you're saying. But
Right.
at the end of the day, you get to the point where, listen, I've done it my way this long,
Yeah.
right? And you've got to make a decision. I am where I am today because of me. You can't blame anybody else. And so the faster that you own it, the faster you're going to change it and optimize it. And that's the thing I would say. It's been an optimization routine over the last, 7 years, where I see myself, I'm making the same mistakes, but then I may be less than I did last time, or I'll be less reactive than I was before,
Yeah.
be more patient, consider other dimensions that I hadn't considered. And I think it's a matter of emotional maturing, if you will. And it's interpersonal relationships. I think a lot of people are really good at what they do, meaning they may be smart in a certain dimension and experienced in another dimension, but they lack the interpersonal relationships, dynamics, and maturity because of whatever reason, programming, that they subvert themselves in life, right? So somebody who's been married, if you've been married more than a couple of times, there's probably some things you could learn, right? Um, if you've been fired in a number of times, then there's probably things you can learn. Uh, I think that as entrepreneurs, we can hide a lot of our flat sides,
I
right?
was talking to someone recently. This is you induced a question in me, I guess. I was talking to somebody, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm doing this." I was talking about the program, right? About the Exponential Life program and how high achievers tend to be unhappy, generally speaking, because of the hyper focus on one thing and less focus on the other. And then this person who I was talking to, who was a client of mine, she said, "So is that really true?" I go, "Yeah, this is true." She goes, "Do they hide it? And then what is? I mean, are they faking it?" I said, "I don't think we fake it on purpose, but you do present well, right? If you're relatively successful. So tell me about that dimension. And I think that's encouraging to most people because we're sort of fundamentally all insecure. We don't want to expose pain. We don't want to expose a struggle. Especially if we've achieved something in life, we sort of want to keep that facade relatively presentable. Tell me about that because I think many people that will listen to this will go, yeah, that's me. How do I overcome that hurdle of the facade issue?
Hmm. I think facade is directly related to your identity, right? I mean, if you're insecure in who you are, even
Yeah.
what you are or what you've accomplished, then you're going to work really hard to look good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that I was really good at presenting a certain, well, I mean, people from high school, people used to say, man, you seem so arrogant. And I'm like, and people would say it, but once I got to know you, you're really not. But
Yep.
I projected this facade
Mm-hmm.
that kept people away. So it was almost like I had this, uh, shield that would prevent, me from being vulnerable, right? And I think that football was a classic,
Right.
sort of illustration of that. I was very good at it because I like to hit and I like to I mean, it was that I was not very vulnerable. I was very sensitive. I was like a little child on the inside, but I had this big veneer around me. And so that actually projected even in my body language, which I wasn't aware of. I didn't understand why people would think that I was arrogant, um,
Yeah, same here, man. I had that same effect.
overconfident or
Had
whatever.
that same
I
effect on
hated
people.
it.
Yeah.
I hated
Me too.
being
Yeah,
like
me
that,
too.
right?
Yeah.
But there was a part of me that was, I'll put it this way. There's a direct correlation of sort of the things that are out of whack with respect to your flat side. The flatter your side, the more you over project the other dimension
Right. You
to
compensate
cover
a little
to
bit. Yeah.
cover. There's
Yeah.
compensation all the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if like just the dynamics of dating, for example, really interesting dynamics of how people show up, right, and
Mm-hmm.
what they do, and whether there's integrity and love as how we're treating other people. I think men get a rap. Men are terrible at times in dating because it's sort of a what's in it for me kind of mentality. And I think that that goes back to things that are it's not about the woman, it's about his issues, way back. So for me, I would just say that I had this problem in relationships because I always came across as arrogant, which nobody likes arrogant people. People like people who are vulnerable,
Yeah.
but, and I would even articulate things that made me sound vulnerable, but the way I carried myself was incongruent with that. And so it wasn't until I think that these layers and I think frankly the safety that you provided and some other close friends provided to be able to just to literally say, hey, you can be yourself. Because
Yeah.
it wasn't a conscious thing. I wasn't consciously putting anything. It was completely subconscious. But I think part of the keys to accessing the subconscious barriers is this layered approach of just obedience. You got to trust. You got to try it on, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like that wax on, wax off. If you may not understand why you're doing it at the time. You just have to have somebody who's wise enough to give you the wax on, wax off, and then eventually you're doing the Karate Kid thing, right?
Yeah. So like, trust the process, right? It's that core, right?
Yeah.
Find someone you respect, admire, and you
But
think
where do you
has
find the process for life like this?
exactly.
You don't
Yeah.
just go to the internet and say, okay, I'm looking. There's lots of coaches,
Right.
lots of
Yeah.
coaches in life. But I think where your program or where you're uniquely qualified to do this is you've been an entrepreneurial leader. You've been a rock star. You've had personal tragedy and you've helped people like me, a couple of people that I know just like me that are, similar.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
but the results are there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the results, you've got to basically look at the results. Like you're somebody who's a rock star that now has had a marriage for like
Yep.
30
25
years.
years. Yeah.
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 Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like the proof's in the pudding kind of thing. So to me,
Mm-hmm.
you want to check out what we call the fruit of the labors, right? And so for me,
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I'm happy. I have a happy marriage. I have stepkids and I have, I have friends and I have, faith and I have a lot of family. And it's just, I'm very thankful that things turn. Now, I wish I could have gone back and rewound the clock 30 years, and that would have been a huge opportunity. So to me, my one piece of advice would be don't wait.
Yeah.
If there's any inkling, if there's any connection, any of this stuff sort of like scratches an itch, don't wait,
Don't.
try it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I totally agree, and I think you did. You went for it, and I'm like you. I say that all the time. Like you're one of my favorite people that I admire for the ability to engage in difficult transformational processes and trust and be both humble and sort of gritty and persistent. And you just get there. And I want to talk to you about how that expresses itself now in your. Like you're working on the biggest project of your life now, which is super awesome in my mind, right? And I really feel like you were given that project because you are more complete and more capable, all around, right? So, but before we get there, I want to talk about this at the end. Tell us about the wonderful Nicole, and because to me that was one of my favorite romantic stories ever, right? But tell us how that played out in your in
Well,
meeting Nicole.
Yeah, there's a lot of dimensions we could press into on this one, and I'd love to share personally with anybody that wants to. However, listen, we all have choices that we get to make, and after you've been through peril and difficulty, you tend to have protections. And so, part of what was really fun is to have you in the journey with me on this. So I didn't trust myself, right? And so I needed guidance. And so we had this really funny dialogue. There was somebody else just before Nicole that I was pretty into, and we had this dialogue like, "What do you think?" And then eventually you're like, "Run, don't walk," and I was like, "All right, I must."
I
Even though
was
my heart,
I was actually hesitant to say that, but you were pressing me like,
yeah.
"What do you really think?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know if you want to know." You know?
But this is what makes life great. Somebody has your back.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
else can you go and people have your back? And you're, because listen, we're blind, and we've got to wake up to the fact we're naturally blind in spots. If
yeah.
we
That's
don't
true.
do that, if we
Hmm.
don't do that, we have no hope. We're
Yeah.
basically stuck with our own thinking. So, but fortunately, because of that, and I think it's really interesting how these things work. You're almost like a test before you're giving the good stuff. Like you have
Yes.
to pass this test by
Yeah.
which you make choices that make you sort of reliable,
Yeah.
and by the way that the choices that you make, that you become more reliable, and then you get the good stuff. So I'd met Nicole, and we were literally early on we're just friends, and it was funny because I won't even get into the story, but there was I had invited her to a party and I had to de-invite her because I was trying to finish something with this old girlfriend that you and I were talking about. And so basically, as it turned out, she was very patient, and both of us were in a place of transformation that just seemed to work out really well. But she's a diamond in my life, and so it's a beautiful marriage, and it's a beautiful, like, it's fun to actually have fun in marriage,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
It's
to
it's a
actually
joy
have your
to witness. You.
best friend, like, you to be just there and be able to
Hmm.
just to have, at this stage of the game, we're not young, spring chickens anymore, but we've lived life, and to enjoy that and to have God at the center and be able to build that, I think, is the power of what we're talking about. It's about building a foundation that you can then lay bricks upon,
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah.
not going to have blown over halfway through the. That was the problem. Every 7 years I would build something, then it would collapse because I didn't have the foundation. So you have to build solid foundational elements, and then that weight can kind of be supported on that foundation, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Well, it's a beautiful thing, your marriage, and it's so this for you guys watching this. He proposed to Nicole during a premiere of a short film I wrote and created, and so we were premiering it at South by at this really great sort of local theater called the Alamo Draft House near downtown. And we had this. It was part of a film festival, so they had these short films, and then interview the creators, and then another short film. So and the film was called Dance with Me, and of course Nicole and Brandon love dancing, and they're beautiful dancers. So Brandon had this idea of sort of surprising everybody, and I mean it's like a full theater of and invite her on a dance. So we talked to the organizer of the festival. He did, and then after my piece, our Deb and I were, she produced it, I directed it. We talked about Dance with Me. I said, well, I have a friend who loves to dance, and he would like to dance for you. And then you bring Nicole out, and she has no idea you're about to propose, and we have footage of this, and there was people like losing their minds, right? Because you like got on one knee, and the whole audience just exploded in jubilant applause. It was really great. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it was special. I mean, just that you had produced that, and we could share that moment together, and it was something we can always look back on with a lot
Yeah.
of fondness. I
Yeah.
think that she was hyperventilating, which was hilarious, but it was wonderful just because I've had the opportunity. Listen, I've had a lot of failure in my life, and I think this is sort of a message. If anybody's listened to this, it doesn't matter how much you failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just have to be humble enough to get help.
Mm.
And I think that to any dimension, there's a lot of dimensionality in life. You can fail in many different directions, and we all do. But unless we actually start asking the questions and getting help from people that can actually shift those things, then we're just in for a long haul of difficulty. So I'm like, stop the madness. do a
Yeah.
do a timeout. Stop the madness. Just have a session. Talk, and I guarantee you'll be happy that you did. You mentioned the project I'm working on now. I don't think that it's pretty amazing. Like I don't think that I could have done this 10 years ago. Um, and what's been great, and even recent conversations we've had around balance, even though you're working a startup, which can be 7 by 24, that's not a good way to approach your startup. It's not sustainable. You need to build well, and part of building well is balance, right? And so I like this program. You talk about being kind of successful and yet unhappy. And I think unhappiness is something we feel, but
Yeah.
guarantee if you want to, unhappiness will come through failure in any of your dimensions. And so unless you're executing on the dimensions in sort of a balanced way, you're in trouble. And so I think that's what's beautiful about this. We have a global gig that I think can have tremendous impact and help a lot of people. And it's called Koinonia, and I'm very honored to be a part of the team that's actually building it. So thanks for your support. And yeah, it's exciting to see what's possible with what's left in life, if you build well.
You're right. Yeah. And I think I love that you're working on Koinonia, because I've as business partners, and we're sort of investors and supporters of startups and founders and things like that. I was actually looking at our calendar, because I was doing this other exercise for something else, about our last 7 years of projects. A couple of days ago, I just spent hours looking at the projects, and it blew my mind how many projects we've done together. It really did. It adds up, man. And so thinking about this, I can see the trajectory. It was wonderful to sort of reminisce, because I can see the trajectory of maturity and wholeness now overflowing into this Koinonia project that you're leading, and you're uniquely qualified to do this. Like it's absolutely, I know this for a fact. People that are around you, your team, they confirmed that we just don't know anyone else who could lead it that way, right? And I really attribute this to the spiritual, emotional, relational work that you've done over the years that got you here. So in some sense, what you thought was, like a mountaintop professional success years ago was not actually. If you deal with the stuff, right? If you do the work, you're given opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to have more impact, to have exponentially more impact, without it costing you your marriage, your family, your friendships, your joy, all of those things. And I think you embody that in remarkable ways.
Thank you. Well, it's a team effort,
Yeah.
so it's like an amazing team. It's amazing how things show up in your life when you sort of are on the right path, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're a part of that, like tremendous. But I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So I appreciate you so much in your mentorship and friendship and support. And I think, like for example, one of the modalities, just even a couple of years ago, I was running a gig that I think I picked my linebacker sort of mentality of driving and tunnel vision and focus, caused some issues with the team, right? And what I learned from that, you and I have kind of
Deconstructed it, right?
deconstructed that and looked at it, and listen, like none of us are perfect, but the ability to change, I
Yeah.
think, is something that's critical. And so in this one, I've invited you to be with the team and get to know them and make sure that they have a pulse on
Yeah.
happiness level. And I mean, we all have weaknesses, but the question is are we enrolling people
Mm-hmm.
to sort of around our flat sides to protect us? So I
Yeah.
love that phalanx thing, right? Back in
Mm-hmm.
Greece, where you have this, ancient way of protecting your brothers, but as a team. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what's missing today is this independence in the West, where we do it all ourselves. That's a total facade, which is not true.
It just
Any
doesn't
good
work. Yeah. Yeah.
any good startup is going to be done by a team. And I think there's more visible people, but I can tell you, even like Elon Musk and some of these other guys that look like they're solo players are not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just they're the vocal ones. But I think I'm thankful for you being part of the team. I'm thankful to be on the team. I'm thankful to have an opportunity to still be in the game after all these years.
Yep.
And many of my colleagues are retiring.
And
I think we're just getting started.
We're just getting started. You're absolutely right. And I feel
Yeah.
the same way about you, because I was, as I was reviewing our projects for the last 7 years, a couple of days ago, I was thinking, never in my wildest dreams as a, media guy, let's say I'm doing music, I'm producing other bands, I am doing music videos, maybe I'm doing film. Okay, that was
Hmm.
probably the sort of the boundary of my imagination of how
Hmm.
where would I would go professionally, right? Maybe I would do
Right.
some nonprofit work. Never in my wildest dream would I imagine myself being a tech investor, a co-founder, a anyone. And this is such an exciting space. And the only reason where I can track with people, I can do some good work, is being around you for 7 years. Seriously, like it's like there's no way I could have had even this dimension of my life present if it wasn't just being around you, learning from you, and sort of at first like barely understanding what you were talking about, and then eventually sort of tracking with you. Maybe not
Yeah.
at the level where you are, but close enough where we can have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
shorthand, and you can talk about a wide range of topics, and
Hmm.
I know it, and I have an opinion about it, right? So,
Hmm.
so it's
Yeah,
just
you could. I mean, you have the full ability to mentor startups. I mean, there's no
yeah.
ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah, so it's and the only reason that is possible is because of you. And I think to your point that we're not created to be solo, sort of this atomic people, like just one person separate from the other. And my journey is my journey, and your journey is your journey. It's just not the best way to live, right? It doesn't work
Hmm.
very well. So awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts, man, and your story, and like we can talk for hours, and we do. So,
Well,
but
thank you.
I wanted
I just want to put a plug in for this program because I'm telling you,
yeah,
there's you can only work with so many people. I mean,
true.
there's a fundamental limitation. My encouragement to you would be get in on the inner circle because this will be a fellowship. There'll be a group of people like us, and you'll be a part of our world, our little circle. And I think it's one of those things that you can't measure in dollars, the value and what you're able to build, what you're able to create, the happiness that you can have as a result of being in the program. So I'm a big fan. I'm going to be right there with you in the program. So
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.